Hi, I'm Illy with the Special Competitive Studies Project. Welcome back to Memos to the President. I'm here with my colleague Paul. Paul, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And I'm so excited about the conversation today because we're talking about the release of the memo that is focused on what we need to do in terms of defense capabilities. But before we talk about the memo, Paul, like I have a tradition with almost every of my guests, is I want the audience and the viewers and listeners to know who Paul is, how you got here. You served in our Navy, which I'm thankful for that, so thank you for your service. But can you please tell us more about who Paul Lyons is?
Yeah, thanks, Ilya. And first, great to be here today and have this discussion with you. A little about myself. I come from a Navy family. My dad and his brothers served in the Navy in the Pacific specifically. And I think when I was growing up as a child, that was really key to my development, to listen to those stories about serving in the Pacific, to being in combat, and just the importance of the Pacific. So when I applied for a Navy ROTC scholarship, one, my dad was excited because he didn't need to pay for college. Second is it just set me on a path to serve my country, which was really something that my father really ingrained in me. That led to, at his advice, to say, hey, Paul, in your generation, the Pacific will be the deciding factor in America's supremacy. That led me to 8 tours in the Pacific, between San Diego, Hawaii, and then 6 in Japan. Blessed to work with great Americans along all that journey, and to serve in some great roles. That includes 4 command tours of a diving and salvage ship, a destroyer, interim CO of a cruiser, and then the culmination in a squadron commander in Japan, working alongside our allies and partners. That said, that's the kind of hardware aspect of the Navy. But the Navy wants to develop leaders to be well-rounded, and we kind of pick our track of development, whether it be finance, acquisition, or pole mill. I chose the pole mill perspective, and that led to some great assignments in the Pentagon, working Iraq policy, Middle East policy,
I didn't know
Russian
that.
policy.
Were you in the Joint Staff or OSD?
Was on the Joint Staff.
J5?
J5,
Excellent.
worked Phase 4 reconstruction for Iraq.
Okay.
So did a lot of work with the State Department, which was a broadening and fantastic experience. Worked acquisition for the Navy, and then the last tour was in the National Defense Strategy in 2018, working for Secretary Mattis and some great Americans, forging the path for where America should go, and most notably, moving the compass heading towards the Pacific.
So you were part of the group of, I think, 05s or 06s that Secretary Mattis put together?
Yes. I was the Navy's designate to be on that team and work with the Marine Corps, Army, Air Force.
Major document. I would call it a milestone document.
Team effort, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we talk about the memo, Paul, one thing, you have served more than 20 years, right? And I wanted to ask you, in your journey, how have you seen sort of the conversation about the future of warfare changing? How have you seen the conversation about the capabilities changing? Obviously, we're focused on AI here at SCSP, but from your life journey, serving and doing 8 tours in the Pacific,
sure,
how have you seen this impact you as a Navy guy?
Yeah, I think if you look back, at least in my timeline, it was all about hardware. It was all about kinetics, hard power, strike groups, and from the Navy example. But really, the warfare we're seeing today is in the non-kinetic space, right? Info, cognitive, cyber, and those are also preparatory to the battle space. So when we talk about technology and how things have changed the battle space and changed the character of war, it's this non-kinetic piece that is both an advantage and disadvantage. So I think from looking from the intel community, having the ability to leverage cyber, to leverage information and cognitive power, if you encompass that into innovation power, it's much more than the individual ships. It's much more than the individual Aegis capability, which in itself provides great capability. But how do you aggregate this technology that is being spurred by our innovation base right now, which is in the private sector? How do you aggregate that capability to provide desired effects today, not waiting for the fight tonight scenario? So a different context.
Interesting. Another question before we get into the memo, Paul, but you've served, as you said, 8 tours in the Pacific. How did you see the China for those 8 tours? How did it change? How did it impact your job?
Sure. Yeah.
So I think that could be a fascinating, like journey that you can describe too.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll go back in the Wayback Machine and look at the Taiwan Straits crisis of 1996. I was a brand new department head, relatively new officer. Taiwan independence was a thing. Obviously, China took issue with this and created the Taiwan Straits crisis. America's naval power was brought to bear, right? In the Indy Strike Group, the Carl Vinson Strike Group, Abraham Lincoln Strike Group brought to bear. That kind of provided the hard power to drive the political and diplomatic dynamics. Fast forward to now, and that journey between then is China's growth in military capability, their expansion beyond the first island chain, their expansion into the Blue Water Pacific, their building of carrier strike groups in the Navy context. So they're building a global Navy that has operational reach and operational capability. So we no longer just encounter them in the near abroad. You see them globally, and their influence is globally. So that's something that is, as we think about defense, and in the American construct, is we are a global power, but now we're being met at the 50-yard line, if you will, and that's something that spurs not only our military thinking, but also our diplomatic as well.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And being there and seeing this firsthand, I'm sure you can write an incredible book of observing this firsthand. Let's talk a little bit about the memo. I think we're at a really historical point now, because I think there's a convergence of events, issues, technologies that come to bear now for the Defense Department writ large to really take a leap forward in terms of how it thinks, how it operates, what it buys, how it interacts with private sector, how it builds war fighters, and the ethos associated with that, which I'm sure you can talk a little bit more. So talk a little bit about the memo. What are the core objectives of the memo? What did you want to present to the president now, Trump? Some options in terms of what can we do to change the Department of Defense?
Yeah, thanks for the forum to talk about the memo. One, I think we're in the decisive decade, so this is a key time to leverage America's strengths, right? Well, too often we think about how we are challenged in meeting the warfighting demands on a global scale, but we really have to leverage our strengths, and this memo does just that. It focuses on building incredible warfighting power across the digital domain, so building that capacity across unrivaled lethality and innovation, holding the high ground in AI and emerging technology that leads us to a digital warfare setting, right? And as you look at our economy, we're focused on a digital economy, but an industrial-based defense system. So
absolutely,
we have this mismatch of capability. But if you look in the private sector, incredible advances in digital capability, right? AI, enhanced AI, on the road to AGI, right? Quantum and biotech. So America has that commanding lead today. We need to preserve that commanding lead. That's the second objective of the memo. And then the last is to rebuild our innovation might. You can see great work, and I'll just name a few, but Anduril, Palantir, OpenAI, Saronic, just doing SpaceX, doing some incredible work in the private sector that government needs to leverage, government needs to partner with to build that industrial base that moves towards an innovation base in the digital sector. Yeah.
Excellent. Let's now go one by one on some of the ideas you present in the paper. Let's start at the strategic level, because I think the memo at the strategic level argues that we need to create a new command. Why do you think creating a new command was necessary, and what would be the objectives and the mission of the new command?
Yeah, thanks, Aili. We advocate for the development of a joint warfare and innovation command. Look, there's many approaches we can approach today's problem.
And you can name it differently,
However
exactly,
however we want to name it. But The fact is, we have a couple COAs in front of us. One is the do nothing COA and just keep doing the business that we do today.
Courses of action.
Courses of action.
Courses of action.
The second is, do we enhance the capabilities that we have today? That's certainly an option. Or do we provide a warfare and innovation command that's joint focused, that has single accountability, that has colorless money, that is going to look at the future operating environment and build those winning operational design concepts that now we provide to the acquisition professionals to provide resources and capabilities to the warfighter. And I think the paradigm has to shift from comfort in the Pentagon to providing that capability to the combatant commander, right, at the scale, complexity, and timelines of the combatant commander needs. So business, as we advocate for, has to change in timelines, has to change in accountability, has to change in how we have agility with money. As we know in the CR world that we often live in, you can't have reprogramming and
Right.
new starts. That has to change. And if you look at the private sector today, who does not operate in those constraints, they have complete economic flexibility to put resources and money where they believe it needs to be. So how do you have government catch up with private industry to develop this capability? So we advocate for not business as usual, but doing a joint warfare and an innovation command to centralize this under a military officer, a 4-star, with a civilian partner.
Right.
And that partner could take many forms and shapes, but how do you leverage the capabilities of the CivMil enterprise within DoD to spur capabilities and product development that meets warfighting needs at scale and complexity and timelines of the combatant commander? We're not doing that today.
Right. You talked about procurement and acquisition of capabilities. I mean, this topic has been as old as probably the Pentagon. You had a commission that Congress created a couple of years ago called PPB Commission that recommended different pathways to buy software. Obviously, our memo doesn't overlook that issue as well. So you argue for creating a tech innovation budget. Can you expand a little bit more about the thinking and the idea, and how do you think we can do that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you look at the FY 2025 budget submittal, $1.8 billion of that budget is dedicated towards AI.
Right.
That is a non-serious commitment towards the development of AI from the government perspective. But if you look in industry, billion-dollar enterprises from just as we talked about this morning, for Anduril to create an arsenal factory.
And we just saw yesterday the president announcing $100 billion investments by a couple of companies.
Incredible investments in this space. Government needs to catch up. To my previous point, creating this innovation budget would allow that agility to take greater than $1.8 billion. And more likely, as we advocate in our memo, 1% of the DoD budget to dedicate it to AI and scaling AI to the warfighter. And I think that's a step in the right direction. Key word is flexibility, where in a landscape of continuing resolutions that driven by the Secretary of Defense, his priorities or her priorities, that we can spur AI development at scale to drive capability development for the warfighter. So kind of parsing off this 1% of the DoD budget is really key to allow that flexibility, which we don't have today.
Right. Another idea you have here and recommendation is really for DoD to play a more prominent role in terms of artificial general intelligence. I mean, we talk a lot about AGI here at SCSP. Obviously, we have companies that in their mission have reaching AGI. And I think from our point of view, the government, or in this case, DoD, should not be just a passive observer. Obviously, in the past, DoD has always played a critical role in the latest and greatest technologies that became dual purpose afterwards. But talk to us a little bit about what's behind this idea, what DoD can do in terms of AGI, and how we get there.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we fast forward from where we are today, which is America's commanding lead in AI, and we look at enhanced AI capabilities, I mean, the iteration of AI capability, every week there's a new adoption and a new sprint to the finish line of new capability. But AGI is the next frontier. and it's probably close aboard more so than we think it is. And it has the opportunity to affect society-wide how we conduct business, right? How society functions. So I don't think warfare is immune to that. So this is a capability that, just like AI, DoD needs to be on the front, cutting edge, leading edge capability development of AGI in partnership with the private sector, our national labs. So there's this public-private partnership that propels America to a commanding lead in AGI because of just its massive effects and the ability of it to reach society and warfare to new realms, to new constructs. DoD has to make eye contact with that. So I think it has no other decision but to lead the efforts on AGI development and put that in the warfighter hands.
Right. And especially on the national security piece, I think no other department is better positioned to carve out what AGI means for the national security purposes, right? Both from the protection side, from the non-proliferation side, and also ultimately for the offensive capabilities that I think our military need. So I agree with you there. Another piece in the memo you talk is how do we prepare our military for the warfare in the digital domain. I mean, you spend most of your career really preparing for the fight in the real life, capabilities against capabilities, carriers against carriers, planes against planes. But we're talking about a new warfare now, which is happening almost daily in the digital domain. So talk to us a little bit about the ideas of how do we prepare our military for that future fight?
Yeah, I think in the digital space, that fight is on today. That is here today. If you look in economic security,
Exactly,
IP theft,
right. What's happening on social media?
It's everywhere. So we're already in this warfare domain persistently. There's pervasive attacks against U.S. Economic power,
Right.
instruments of national power. So how do you prepare for that? Well, we need to get involved in the digital domain, but to unify our efforts. And today there's a lot of great work being done by Cybercom, in this space specifically to cyber, but it's more than cyber. It starts with cyber, but grows into the information cognitive domain and electronic warfare domain, where we are under constant fight. So we advocate for a digital warfare corps to kind of spur together the more than cyber, but it starts with cyber, but this information, cognitive, and EW capabilities that allows us to take this fight to our adversaries who are taking it to us today. And so that would help in that domain. Then going up a next level is formulating a U.S. digital command. So think about a four-star officer that is accountable for the defense and offense of America's capability in this space.
This is more about renaming and remissioning Cybercom that exists today, right?
This is about supercharging
Right,
Cybercom, right, to expand its capability, its remit into the information, cognitive, and electronic warfare domain. So Cybercom has done phenomenal work in the cyberspace, but that is only one component of the threat.
The landscape has changed.
Exactly right.
And threats have changed as well.
Exactly right. So the last component of this is, how do you train the digital warfighter? How do you train the digital workforce that's required for this next era, this next generational fight? So we advocate for a digital service academy to kind of unify the effort to train to a common standard, train the digital workforce, civilian included, so you can enable the warfighter with a savviness behind it in the digital domain.
The last two recommendations, the first one has to do with, we talk a lot about this, I think the Ukraine conflict really exposed the fragility of the defense industrial base, but you call on building the defense innovation and industrial base. Can you expand a little bit about that? How can we do that? I mean, there's a lot of talk, but I think everything has changed. I mean, how we build stuff, how we deploy stuff has constantly changed. Advanced manufacturing, something we work on here at SCSP, has also entered an arena here now in how we build stuff going forward. So talk a little bit about your recommendation. Why is this important?
Yeah, I think we're in an era, to my previous point, that we have a digital economy, and yet we're still an industrial focused in the defense space. We need to cross that divide into the innovation domain, right? And we've seen that in the private sector. So with the private sector spending its own resources, developing its own capabilities, developing scaling, hyperscaling, and advanced manufacturing, that's a mindset shift from DoD in its approach. So maybe the defense innovation and industrial base is no longer five primes. It's the reverse of the Last Supper, right? And it spurs entrepreneurship across America to contribute to the defense of the United States. And that's by leveraging maybe a smaller or more agile governance piece towards a larger innovation base that is already demonstrating its ability to scale, hyperscale, and provide innovative solutions ahead of what government can provide. So kind of a mindset shift, but also a partnership shift between DoD and our private sector.
Right. And then the last piece, when you talk about partners, I mean, we operate with our allies around the world, and so you argue that we need to forge a new allied innovation coalition. Can you talk a little bit and expand a little bit about this idea we have here?
Yeah, most definitely. I think AUKUS is the grassroots of this effort. Is how do you take America's best capability and proliferate it to our allies and partners, and vice versa. One thing that we talked about in Seoul during our REAIM, our responsible use of AI in the military domain panel that we led, is there's a potential here to take existing interoperability and do harm, right? To build a situation, an allied construct where there's have and have-nots. So we need to recognize that and bring allies in on the front end to take their strengths and capabilities, leverage those with ours, and work together. This means export controls. This means advanced manufacturing. It means bringing allies and partners in on the front end. So we move beyond interoperability and actually get to integrated and interchangeable, because that's what the geostrategic trend lines demand of us.
Right. Thank you, Paul. I mean, all recommendations, I think in totality, from the strategic to tactical, make sense. I think we're at that point now. We really have to do these changes. But stepping back a little bit, we are working with departments and agencies that were created basically by the 1947 National Security Act. And so in the introduction of the memo, you touch upon a little bit on the need for us to revisit that act. And I agree with you. The reality, the challenges, the threats we face today, in particular China, require us to look more differently about how we're getting ourselves organized. And so can you talk a little bit about your idea about what we should do about the National Security Act of 1947?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think there's a great opportunity here that America should seize, and specifically DoD. And we do advocate in the memo for a National Security Act of 2025, specific to DoD. We do need to organize for success. The reality is we have committed adversaries. We have an axis of disruptors, as we talk about here at SCSP, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, notably. But the changing character warfare is upon us. We see that in Ukraine today. We see it in Gaza. We see it in the Red Sea. So we're organized for the last fight. So there's a great opportunity, concomitant with the recommendations in our memo, to embrace maybe a holistic look at this and say, are we organized for success? And does the organization that we had previously fit the modalities and the threats that we have today, which are now global, which are now all domain? So we advocate for a National Security Act to bring that presidential and administration heft to this, to really take an earnest look at how we're organized and address America's strengths, things that we need to improve, and our organizational structure that will allow us to produce the most potent military, the most lethal military and warfighters that the world has ever seen.
Absolutely. I mean, in the other memos, especially in our econ memo, we argue about the Department of Commerce being reorged, because I think if there's one department at the center of techno-economic competition, it's really the Department of Commerce, which was established a long time ago and it's still under-resourced, undermanned for the challenges we face today in the techno-economic competition with China. But obviously, DoD is one of the largest departments, and we need to take a look at what kind of a National Security Act for today's challenges we need. So I agree with you on the relooking of the National Security Act of 1947. Before we end the podcast, Paul, my tradition is to ask my guests about what if there are students around the country, hopefully listening or watching, debating internally whether or not they should join the Navy or join the military or come to DC and join any of the departments and agencies. What would be your message to them? I mean, we're surrounded by a lot of young people here that come and spend time with us, whether they're interns or entry-level jobs, and I'm always in awe with their passion and dedication to come and serve our country. What would be your message to those young people?
Yeah, my message is, having been all over the world and seen, countries in conflict, countries in turmoil, when you land in America and come back and land at Dulles, for instance, you just get this sense of America's greatness, right? And that should hit everybody right here.
Right.
My personal opinion is every American should serve their country in some capacity, whether that's in uniform, whether that's a civil servant. But the glorious thing is that combining both those capabilities, the warfighter and the civil servant, produces DoD's greatness, right? I did it as a career. Everyone doesn't need to do it as a career, but no one should take America for granted, right? This is the greatest country in the world. This is the greatest land of opportunity. We come from, different backgrounds, but, I came from the middle class of America, and the Navy took me to great places and brought me here today.
Right.
So I don't think it has to be a career for everybody, but it should be a path, because giving back to your country, there's nothing better and nothing more rewarding.
I agree, Paul. On that note, I want to thank you for your service first. Thank you for the conversation and for the incredible memo you did. And I look forward to, having you again. For those of you watching, thanks for tuning in. This was another episode of Memos to the President. Topic of this podcast was the defense reform and the future of warfare. Thank you.